What is going on, guys? I am Consumer Tech Review, and today we're going to be reviewing the CIY X77. If at any point during the video you want to check out the X77 or the Tecware Phantom, which we're going to be comparing to, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. But let's jump into it, starting with what's in the box. Firstly, getting the box open, you have the CIY X77 keyboard wrapped in PE foam. The PE foam can be used for modding if you'd like to. I definitely would recommend that for a more creamy sound, creamy build. Then you have a standard black rubber-coated USB Type-C to USB Type-A cable. You then have the user manual, and then a metal switch puller, and then a basic green keycap puller. Keycap puller is not the best. It will scratch your keycaps, but well, we'll get into that. All right, moving on to form factor and build quality. The X77 is the same form factor as the Tecware Phantom 87, which is a TKL or 10 key less. This is a great form factor and honestly a really good form factor for really good budget boards. I don't know why, but for some reason, some of the best value is in TKLs at a low price point like these are. All right, build quality is actually surprisingly good here with a solid top metal plate. Now, this metal plate is nice and thick. It's very rigid. However, it's not quite as thick as the Tecware Phantom 87's plate. This is actually a fairly thin plate. Not that that's a problem, but just saying. Also, a little note that the plate on the X77 actually sits on top of the case, whereas on the Tecware Phantom 87, the metal plate sits inside of the plastic case. Those are just subtle differences, but I think it probably will add to a more rigid experience, which is what I found, although it's slight. Now, the bottom plastic case is nice. It's pretty rigid. There's really no flex in the board. This also has dual stage risers on the bottom, which is something we only really find on more premium boards. So this was very cool to have this. That's something the Tecware Phantom 87 does not have. Now, the case feels slightly hollower than the Tecware Phantom 87, but it overall does not feel hollow. This is actually incredibly impressive. When we move on to the next section, you'll kind of see why. Now, the last thing with the build quality is there's a very cool magnetic skirt that's very nice, actually. It's all plastic, but you can either get it in color matched black or white or this kind of like silvery color that I went for, but it's magnetic. That means if you want to paint and change the entire keyboard's color, you can literally just pull this off magnetically, go outside, spray paint it, put it back on your keyboard, change your keycaps, and now you have a different colored board. That makes it really easy to mod, and this is something that on the Tecware Phantom, you can actually get skirts like that, but I think they're around 15 bucks, so that gives you a lot more value. Okay, but moving on to mounting style and dampening. This is where we're gonna talk about the hollowness a little bit. All right, for the mounting style, this is obviously tray mounted, like the Tecware Phantom 87. They all have standoffs. Now, quite a lot of screws from the plate down into those standoffs, so that does take a little bit to get those off. However, zero case dampening, literally none. The Tecware Phantom 87 has plate and PCB dampening as well as case dampening. However, you might think that sucks, and yeah, it does. However, moving back to when I said it doesn't feel that hollow, that was my impressions. I tapped on it without going inside the board, so I have nothing changing my opinion. I don't know what's inside of this board yet. Tapping on the back, feeling it, it doesn't feel that hollow stock, and there is zero dampening. No dampening between the plate and the PCB, no dampening in the case. That's impressive. That means with case dampening, it's gonna be even better. So that's very cool. I definitely give props to the X77 for not sounding hollow or that hollow without having any case dampening, although it would upgrade the sound substantially. All right, moving on to the keycaps. Now, these are OEM profile, similar to the Tecware Phantom 87. This is kind of your like average budget profile. It's fine for gaming, great for gaming. However, this is double shot ABS. Now, I believe the Tecware Phantom 87 is PBT. I'll put it here if it's not. If nothing's there, then it is PBT. Now, the ABS will shine over time if you're using it a lot. However, you might think, okay, well, super high-end keycaps are ABS. That's really due to overall printing imperfections. ABS is a little bit easier to have less printing imperfections, but for budget keycaps, PBT is absolutely better than ABS because you're gonna have those imperfections anyway. It's super budget. And let's be real, these keycaps suck. They're awful. They sound pretty bad. The switches themselves are scratchy because they're kind of Aotemu quality. However, the keycaps make them sound scratchier. I don't even know how, but these keycaps, they're definitely higher pitched. They don't have a good sound. No matter if you're an enthusiast or not, you will notice if you have some other keycaps to switch onto these don't sound the best. You could definitely live with them if you're not an enthusiast. Absolutely. Like, it's a keyboard, it works, but these keycaps are not the best, especially when compared to the Tecware Phantom 87. And we're gonna get more into that because there's a big problem with the keycaps that even if you don't care about sound, still a big problem. One last thing to talk about before we talk about the big problem is that there is that ugly white printing. It even has the Internet Explorer logo on there, which I'm not sure how that's done because of like copyright laws. However, the ugly white printing is on there. So regardless of the keycaps, I probably wouldn't like keeping them on there just because of that. But again, personal preference. But the biggest problem with the keycaps is that the shine through, they're all shine through keycaps. The Tecware Phantoms are, as well as the X77s, but these shine through keycaps like dim the light. And this is really apparent when you switch the Tecware Phantom 87's keycaps onto this keyboard. And you can see the brightness level of both keyboards is pretty much the same with the RGB or the LED light. However, these keycaps just dim the light a lot. So at night, you can definitely see it. Like, don't worry about that, but it's not quite as bright and as vibrant as the Phantom 87, but that is only a keycaps thing. So if you swapped in new keycaps onto this thing, no problem. All right, moving on to switches and hot swappability. Now on the X77, you have a choice between blue switches, red switches, and black switches. No, just tactile switches. Interesting, but I don't mind it. Now these switches are Jixian, I think I'm saying that correctly, and they're Cherry MX clones. They are significantly worse than Cherry MX's. They're about Altemu quality, right? If you have used Altemu switches, they're basically that quality. These are not the dustproof style stem, just normal. The one that I personally have, just for the sound test so that you guys know, are the black switches. Now, both on the Tecware Phantom 87, which does use Altemu switches, and these that use Jixian switches, these have spring ping. These have spring ping. I was actually looking on the Amazon listing and I saw that they replied to someone asking about the switches and said there's no spring ping. There is spring ping. Trust me, there is. If it's any cheap switch, it probably has spring ping. If you do want to go ahead and lube your switches, which would definitely upgrade the heck out of these just with these stock switches, although I think it would be a better value to get better switches, this would probably take away the spring ping. I've done that before and it seemed to have worked on Altemu switches, so I would assume it would work here. However, the switches are really not meant to be kept on this specific board because this is fully hot swappable with 3 and 5 pin switches. That's the biggest difference between the Tecware Phantom 87 and this board. This one's fully hot swappable. This is absolutely huge for modding. And if you ever want your keyboard to sound like a true custom keyboard, this keyboard is something that can be done on very, very easily, where the Phantom 87 is definitely a little bit more difficult and it definitely limits you because it's only hot swappable without Temu switches. You can find some other switches that go in there, but it's very difficult to do. It's definitely possible and I've done it, but having full hot swappability with 3 and 5 pin switches, that's where it's at. Now for the hot swap direction, north-facing LEDs. That's what you get. It's a budget board. You would expect that. But this is the biggest kind of commonality that you'll see between the Tecware Phantom 87 and the X77, which is, if you want to mod the heck out of your board, or if you want to do some modding easily, the X77. If you want a stock board, Tecware Phantom 87. All right, but moving on to the stabilizers, let's talk about it. Now, these are plate-mounted stabilizers. Overall, in the plate, they're pretty dang tight, tighter than I was expecting. They do not need to be clipped as well, which that's something that the Tecware Phantom 87 did need to have happen. They did need to be clipped. Although still before being clipped, they sounded quite nice, which is impressive. However, they kind of do need to be clipped. I guess they don't need to be. However, after modding, I would probably say it would be easier to mod the X77s because you know, there's just not as much things to do. You don't have to clip them, which is great. But let's talk about the overall tuning. The Tecware Phantom 87 is the best tuned stabilizers I've ever used with any keyboard below $75. It's unbelievable. Still to this day, the best tuned stabilizers under 75 bucks I can find. Unbelievable. I don't know how they do it. Zero rattle, zero shake. I mean, truly, like, it just drops my jaw. Now this one, very good. This has very well-tuned stabilizers. Is it on the level of the Tecware Phantom 87? Not quite, but it's just off. The overall feel of the stabilizers, slightly better on the Phantom 87, and they're slightly better tuned on the Phantom 87. Both of them don't have any rattle. They just sound great, which is really good. If you put some nicer switches on the X77, put some dampening in the case, I wouldn't even re-lube or retune the stabilizers on the X77 if I'm doing a build. Honestly, it's that good. That's very impressive. All right, moving on to typing, sound, and feel. We are gonna do a sound test at the end, a back-to-back sound test at the end of the section, so stick around for that and the rest of the video. Okay, so firstly, this is tray mounted. It's going to be stiff. And for some reason, the overall rigidity of the typing experience felt more rigid on the X77 than the Tecware Phantom 87. Again, this is a slight difference, and this may have to do with the metal plate being on top of the plastic case on the X77, and then on the Tecware Phantom 87, the metal case is inside of that plastic case. This probably has a slight difference, and again, I do want to say this is a slight difference. They're both tray mounted, so they are both pretty rigid. Not a bad thing, especially if you're gaming. But now let's talk about sound. Now, as for the sound, well, there's no competition. The Tecware Phantom 87 sounds amazing. It sounds incredible for having Outemu switches and then the price point that it is. All stock, it just sounds leaps and strides better. But don't take my word for it. Take a listen to the back-to-back sound test, Tecware Phantom 87 and the X77. Take a listen. And that is how it sounds. However, I do want to say the X77 can be modded so much more easily than the Tecware Phantom 87. And when the X77 is modded, it's just going to sound better than an equally modded Phantom 87 just because you can't mod the Phantom 87 as much as you can with the X77. Not even talking about the ease of modding with the X77. So I do want to point that out. We're kind of getting into the point, but the overall conclusion of which one you should buy if you're in the market for a TKL that's very nice, that's in the price and value section. All right, let's move on to RGB. Now RGB is great here. It's bright, it's got a ton of different modes, it's got static colors. It's got the main static colors that if you do want to match your setup, you can absolutely do that. It's Parky RGB, it's everything you would expect. Now the Tecware Phantom 87 versus this, the overall brightness of the LEDs, colors, vibrancy, it's exactly the same. The only thing that holds the X77 back are those keycaps, but the overall LED, it's basically the exact same. The only difference here is that the Phantom 87 has like 90 different static colors that will do, you know, a green, a lighter green, a dark green, a this green, a that green, a that green. So they have a lot more variation with the static colors, whereas the X77 only has a few of those static colors. For me, not really a big deal because I'm only gonna have it in one static color at a time, or I'm just gonna put non-shine through keycaps on it. So really the only difference is the LEDs are pretty much the same, but the Phantom 87 just has more of those different static colors, which is cool. All right, but let's move on to the battery and connectivity, but there is no battery. So that section is kind of an interesting section. However, for connectivity, the X77 has a detachable USB-C, whereas the Tecware Phantom 87 is full wired. There is no detachable cable. That being said, the USB Type-C port has this big like bezel around it, this big plastic bezel around it. And not a single one of my custom coiled cables, not a single one fit inside of that port. Now, this is a very easy fix. Take a file, just file that plastic down. You're never gonna see it, and it would be easy. If you wanna do it with sandpaper, there you go. It's a very quick fix. We're talking 2-minute fix. I wouldn't let that be a deal breaker. I would still much rather have the USB Type-C rather than having a non-detachable one. That's a huge upgrade, especially if you want to really mod your keyboard out. That's kind of a must for me. Now, another thing with the X77 is the X77 actually has a daughter board for that USB-C. And obviously on the Phantom 87, no daughter board. The daughter board is great because you can detach the PCB from the daughter board and still have that USB-C in the same section. So it's a little bit easier to mod for that, and something that's typically more common on higher end boards, not boards at this price point. So that is very cool. All right, but probably the most important section, price and value. Now the Phantom 87 is priced at $46, which is incredibly reasonable, and the X77 is listed at $45. So basically they're the same price. Both are fantastic boards and a fantastic value, but I'm gonna tell you which one you should buy. They're made for basically the opposite people. If you want a fantastic stock board that you have to do absolutely nothing to, and it performs really well, but it's not gonna be quite an enthusiast board, but it's still very good stock, Tecware Phantom 87. Buy it, don't do anything to it, use it every day and love it. However, if you do want to mod it, maybe you want to put new switches in, play around with stuff, and you can play around with anything. You want to spray paint it, change the color, you just want to add new keycaps, or you want to do a total revamp, do O-ring mount, tape mod, lube your switches, redo the stabilizers, do a silicone mold in the case, anything you want. The X77 is absolutely a better board for modding 100 times out of 100, but I absolutely recommend both of them. They are fantastic boards. Again, if you want to check out either of them, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. So again, if you want to customize it, do modding, X77, and if you want a fantastic stock board, the Phantom 87. A lot of you guys asked me to do this a long time ago, and I've had this board sitting in the studio for months, literally, and I finally did the review, and the Gas 67 by CIY, the same company, that will be coming soon. I still have to order it, but I saw so many of you commenting about that, so I absolutely will be doing a video on that. And I also believe, I might be wrong about this, but I believe Drop, like Mass Drop, I believe they're actually starting to sell that on their website soon. I'm not 100% sure about that, but yes, this is a consumer tech review, and I'll see you guys in the next video.